This is Trevor Kouritzin. I'm here with IFBB Pro Colette Nelson for the second part of our Insulin Exposed video series. So in part one, we discussed that if you're over 100 fasting blood glucose, you're going to want to take some mitigation strategies. So the first thing we recommended is, try just prioritizing your carbs around your workout, minimize stimulants, try to minimize stress, improve sleep. Luckily, if you're a young guy who hasn't been abusing carbs, stimulants too long, you'll most likely be able to get your fasted blood glucose under 100 just by doing some lifestyle changes. However, if you make the necessary lifestyle changes, if you're being smart with your diet, if you're being cognizant about your stimulant usage or stress, and your fasting blood glucose numbers are still high, we recommend getting further blood work testing. So that's what we're first going to do. We're going to talk about what to get tested in the blood work and what all those numbers mean. So the first thing you should get tested is insulin levels. So Colette, talk to us about what exactly that is and what numbers you would want to see.
So you're looking at how much insulin your body is putting out. So those normally range in the United States between 2 and about 20, right? So in somebody that has this predisposition for this prediabetes, you might see those levels high because the body is working too hard because the cells are resistant. So that's a common denominator, which sounds counterintuitive. Now, if you do see that the insulin levels are really low, you could be on your way to type 1 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes starts with higher than normal insulin levels. So just make sure that's clear. And that's the reason why is because the body is working too hard and it's trying to keep the blood sugar down, and it can't.
Okay, so the second thing you should get tested is C-peptide. So Colette, talk to us about C-peptide.
C-peptide is very important. That is showing the body's ability, the endogenous insulin production. Okay, so those two tests kind of correlate to some extent. So, for example, I have no C-peptide. Okay, so C-peptide is usually between 0.8 and 3.85. So mine is less than 0.1. Feel sorry for me. Okay, I don't make any insulin. So when you see the C-peptide low, this can be confusing on some levels too. If you see the C-peptide low, then the body is not making much insulin, okay? So if the C-peptide is in normal range, then your body is still producing insulin and you're in a good place. You're in the place where that, if your fasting sugars are running higher and you're making a good C-peptide, you got hope. Your beta cell's still functioning. It's looking good. When you got to get concerned is when that C-peptide starts to get lower. So if you have a low C-peptide and very high insulin levels, eventually what will happen is you'll have a low C-peptide. That's not going to change, but the insulin levels are going to come down where you don't make any more insulin.
So the third thing you want to get tested is your hemoglobin A1c. So Colette, talk to us about that.
So the hemoglobin A1c is, we find, one of the gold standards, and we actually use this to diagnose. So this is very important, and this is one that you really want to listen to. Prediabetes is a hemoglobin A1c, and what it's looking at is the life of the red blood cell. The red blood cell lives for 120 days. So what they do is they take a hemoglobin, red blood cell, A1c, and they're looking at how much glucose has collected on top of the red blood cell. So it's telling a huge story, okay? 5.7 to 6.4 is prediabetes. Again, 5.7 to 6.4, we're diagnosing it. So if you come up with a 5.6, I'm worried. I'm like the person that's like, okay, red flag. Okay, so that means you're in a situation where the beta cell is starting to fail. Once you get to 6.5, the beta cell usually is only functioning at 50%. So then the higher the A1c, the more risk for micro and macro vascular complications. So there's a big A1c scale that we'll put up so that you'll see what I mean, because each of these numbers equate to a 3-month average. So for example, if your A1c is a 5, your average glucose is about 90 for 90 days, which is excellent. Okay, so I would love to have an A1c of 5. I have a 5.3, by the way, so I'm not doing too bad, but, and I'm a type 1, but yes, so that's really important is to check that A1c. It is a diagnostic criteria now, so it's important.
And then there's also some specific type 1 diabetes tests you'd want to get done. So if you're type 1 diabetic, you'd also want to get these tested. The first one is GAD65 antibody.
Right, so this is what happens in type 1 diabetes. It is an autoimmune disease. And it happens at any age. That's why we don't call it juvenile diabetes anymore. If you have type 1 in your family, and I say that because my father was type 1 and there is this kind of hereditary component, but then I find that people, what the hell, how did they get at type 1 diabetes? It's that crazy world of we live in now where we're seeing an actual increase in type 1 diabetes. And then we find that 30% of our type 2s are actually type 1s, and we call them type 1.5. So if you have any concern and you're on the younger side and you're just, after everything you're doing the things that Trevor and I speak about when you're trying to get that fasting sugar down, yet it's not happening and you're just, something's wrong. You know, you're getting this kind of the symptoms of diabetes, which is extreme thirst, excessive eating, and losing weight and losing muscle. You're basically, your body's eating itself, okay? That's when you want to get these GAD antibodies. It's a GAD65 antibody. That's the particular antibody that starts attacking the beta cell. And if that's high, so for example, mine is actually, I'm looking at my lab work, it's funny enough. Mine's in, let's see, mine's are 72. They should be less than 5. Guess what? I'm a type 1, there's no question. So anything over 5, okay, is a concern. Mine's 72. So my antibodies are absolutely firing and attacking my beta cell every single day. God help us find a cure for autoimmune diseases, but that's one you want to test for type 1.
So the second type 1 diabetic specific blood work biomarker you'd want to test for is your isolate cell antibody screen.
Yes, so that one, mine, for example, is 2.9. It should be less than 0.8. So I am testing positive for yet another, the isolate cell, you guys, isolate cells of Langerhans are the beta cell that's making my insulin. So I'm having it come from different angles. There are actually people that have different types of type 1 diabetes that don't actually have the GAD antibodies, but they have these isolate cell antibodies. So either way, they're not producing the right amount of insulin to maintain their blood sugar levels. Me, unfortunately, I have different antibodies firing. So I have a worst case scenario. So I don't have any insulin production. Some production is better than none.
So the last type 1 specific blood work biomarker you'd want to test for is your isolate IA2 antibody screen.
So it's interesting. I'm actually in the right range for this. Mine's not high. So I guess that's a positive. But the other two are so strong that I'm not doing so well because I'm not making any insulin. But it should be less than 0.4. And mine actually is. So I never tested positive for this particular antibody. So if you have all three, I guess I would say that you're at a worse stage in autoantibody hormones. But that might be another reason why most type 1s and autoimmune diseases like to come in 3s. So I never had celiac. I didn't get Hashimoto's either. And Hashimoto's is a thyroid condition that the thyroid antibodies are attacking the thyroid. So I am lucky in that nature. So those are the 3, though, in particular that you want to have looked at if you have any concern that this might be more sinister than just some auto regulation of your blood sugar.
So now we're going to get into all the different types of insulin. So Colette is going to talk about the half-life and when you'd want to take it. So the first one we're going to talk about is Humalog.
So this is the tried and true, and I think everybody knows Humalog, right? I mean, Humalog, you guys, these come in pens now. This is kind of the preferred way of giving insulin, I think, because it's just easier. They come in these little pen devices, and then you just put on a pen needle right here on the top, and that you change every day. And many times you take your insulin. So Humalog now, all these insulins like to come concentrated. You'll notice that they come in U100 and U200. They're just concentrated. Pen does the math, actually. So you don't want to pull it out from a syringe anymore because sometimes these insulins are concentrated. We'll talk about that when we get into some of the basal insulins. Humalogs, these, when we talk about these rapid acting insulins, are all very, very similar in their action of onset. And I want to almost put them, not to talk over you, Trevor, and then be long-winded, but this one is one of the faster of your rapid-acting insulins. It starts in about 10 to 15 minutes. It peaks in about 60 to 90 minutes, and then it's out of the body in about 4 to 5 hours. So you're really looking at that peak action in the first 90 minutes to 2 hours.
Humalog is the one that everyone's using pre-workout and then taking all the intra-carbs and essential amino acids. That's, I would say not very many diabetics are actually using Humalog, but it's all the bodybuilders doing these crazy workout shakes. The next one we're going to talk about is Apedra.
Right. So Apedra is an interesting. This is was Sanofi's second launch to Lantus, which is interesting because they have one of the best top-selling basal insulins on the market. They couldn't get this one any market action. Really, this doesn't have a lot of market share. So Apidra actually is a faster. So it really goes in line of fast action. This is actually a little bit faster than Humalog. This one has a start time of about 5 to 10 minutes and peaking in about 60 to 90 again, and out of the body in about 4 hours. So this one is a little bit more rapid. I've taken this one. This is by far faster than Humalog. And what we're trying to do by speed is just mimicking physiology a little bit better by the speed and action of the insulin. So there's Apidra.
So we got 2 more to go through. The next one is going to be Novolog.
So good old Novolog. Okay, a lot of people take Novolog because Novolog is the Novo Nordisk version of Humalog. But in action time, you really go Apidra, Humalog, and Novolog. Novolog really starts in almost 15 to 20 minutes. And it peaks again in about 90 minutes. And it's has a little bit of a longer tail. Okay, so it's still a rapid acting insulin, but it's the slowest of the rapids. Again, still a premium insulin, still one that many people use in the bodybuilding world, and obviously what a type 1 would use for mealtime insulin.
And now finally, the new kid to the block, Afrezza. I know this is the one Colette's super excited about.
Yeah, this is, before we talk about Afrezza though, there's Fiasp, which came out in response to almost the rapidity of Afrezza. Fiasp came out in Canada first, Trevor. This was, and everybody in the US was trying to get their hands on it. Fiasp starts in 2.5 minutes, you guys. So it's in the body extremely quick. Okay, there's no 10 to 15 minutes waiting. I mean, 2.5 minutes. And the peak time in about 60 minutes. And it's out of the body in about 4 hours, okay? So finally, you have kind of what's considered Afrezza, which is actually the most bioidentical of all the rapid-acting insulins. So when you think about injecting insulin, you guys, it's in a hexamer. It's in several molecules, and those molecules have to be injected into the subcutaneous, which is your fat tissue, and it has to get into the peripheral, there's a key word, peripheral bloodstream, right? It never really goes through the portal circulation, which is the liver. And remember what we talked about in the liver in the first series. The liver is constantly pushing out glucose. So this is why Ali Amin, I have to give him credit on this one, he did a whole thing on Afrezza, because he feels that this could be a very landmark rapid-acting insulin. So what you're doing is you're actually putting in a cartridge of insulin on units. Okay, it comes in 4, 8, and 12 units, and these little cartridges go inside this little device, and then all you're doing is, and that's how you take your insulin. And now, not only is it not an injection, it's very convenient. It's actually shutting off the alpha cell, which makes glucagon. So there's less fat gain with an Afrezza than there would be with an injected insulin, just by the nature of delivery and it's being more bioidentical to the body. It's in the body in less than 1 minute, it peaks in 45 minutes, and it completely clears from the body in 90 minutes, clears, gone, in a 4-unit cartridge. And in a 48 units, the 48 units, it doesn't last any longer than 3 hours. So you're reducing the risk of hypoglycemia. Could be, no one's even talking about this. Amin is, I'm using it. That's the insulin I use. I don't use injected insulin. This is by far the most unique delivery system and probably the best way to deliver insulin, just by nature of the way the lungs absorbs it and the blood vessel and how much vascularity there is in the lungs to the body.
Well, pretending that Amin Ali didn't already talk about it, you guys heard it here first. So I'm super excited to be delivering this groundbreaking information for you guys. Now talk to us about the basal insulin. Before we get into all the different types, talk about the difference between basal insulin and all the different forms of insulin you just spoke about.
So what we just spoke about, you guys, was the rapid-acting mealtime insulin. So in a person with type 1 diabetes, they can't control their insulin on basal alone, because a basal insulin is just a flat insulin that sits in the background for 24 hours. Everybody makes insulin every hour. Everybody. Now, you need insulin every single minute, every second of your life. But when you eat, you need what are called a bolus of insulin. These are all bolus insulins. You need a particular output of insulin for every single thing you eat. Everything. So that even includes fats and proteins, which people don't oftentimes think about. So it's not just your carbs. Proteins can convert to glucose, and even your fats can convert to glycerol. And at some level, they raise your total daily dose of insulin. So those are all your rapid acting insulins, necessary to control glucose at meals. Basal insulin is extremely important to fix the fasting blood sugar and to give you back that homeostasis. And in my theories, if you can give a basal insulin, again, it just brings your bottom line, your baseline blood sugar down a little bit and gives the beta cell a little bit of rest because it's working for 24 hours a day. Give it a break, and it's giving it a break by giving it a basal insulin.
So now talk to us about the different types of basal insulins and half-lives, peak times, things like that.
So let's start with everybody's talking about Lantus. Like Lantus was the number one basal insulin on the market. And this came to market around 1999, 2000. Okay, so this revolutionized type 2 diabetes. And it's going to continue to revolutionize, as back then they started to realize, wow, you can give insulin to type 2s. They actually thought that you couldn't give insulin to type 2 diabetics. Now, think about where we are now. It's like they're giving them to all of them because there's no other way to control their beta cell, because their beta cells failed because they were so silly to think that these people could just survive on pills that weren't controlling their blood sugar. And they didn't realize that now today's world is beta cell preservation. Ask any top endo, they're like, we got to preserve the beta cell. And how do we do that? Insulin, actually. That's how we do that. So Lantus is the tried and true. Lantus, unfortunately, I'm going to tell you guys the truth about Lantus. They say it's a 24-hour insulin, but we know better now. They didn't really change the package insert, but it actually starts in about 1 hour. And then it doesn't have a peak. But people that know Lantus in the type 1 world will know that they're listening to me. You won't notice this if you're type 2. You won't notice this even if you're bodybuilding and you're taking it. But it has a bit of a peak at about 6 to 8 hours. It's flat, but at about 6 hours, it comes up a little bit, and then it comes back down. And then it's out of the body in about 16 to 18 hours. So I have been one to usually split that. And I see a better, just the way it stacks on each other gives you a flatter profile. And that's what you want. You want flat and predictable. So it's been, historically given once a day, Lantus. But if you think about it, it doesn't really last that full 24 hours. That's Lantus.
Do you want to talk about any of the other basal forms of insulin, or do you think Lantus is pretty much
No, I think that Lantus now has been replaced. Like Novo Nordisk came up with Levemir, and Levemir falls short. It's about a 14 to 16 hour insulin, starts in about 1 to 2 hours. And again, that does have a peak, and that is suggested to split twice a day. So if you're using Levemir out there, you should split that insulin. Then after that, they realized that we need a 24-hour insulin. So Sanofi came up with the genius idea of concentrating Lantus. They took Lantus and they squeezed the molecule. They made it smaller. So if a depot is like how much you inject. If this is Lantus, this little circle, this is Toujeo. It's much less liquid. They concentrated to a U300. So 1 unit on a U100 syringe is actually 3 units. They concentrated the insulin. Let me keep it simple. By concentrating, you're injecting less liquid in your body, and it dissipates over 36 hours. So now we know that we had the drawbacks of Lantus. Now Toujeo came out, and Toujeo is a 36-hour insulin, sits much flatter, and it's giving you about that 24-hour profile. So Toujeo was kind of like, wow, now we're finally sitting with a more predictable basal insulin. I like that one much better than Lantus and much better than Levemir. Then what I consider basically one of the most innovative basal insulins by Novo Nordisk was Tresiba. And Tresiba took what Toujeo did, used it in a U100 or U200, which is just a concentration, and gave you 42 hours. So that doesn't mean you dose it every other day. I mean, they tried to do that. Then they realized, wait a minute, that's crazy. The dose is a little bit interesting because it's so flat that by stacking it, you just do it every day, once a day, 42 hours. And by the way that it stacks, by the 5th day, you reach steady state. And it really has, in terms of flat predictability and very low risk of hypoglycemia. It has a great profile of when you take it. So we tell people to take basal insulin at the same time every day. You don't have to. With Tresiba, you could be within an 8-hour window. So it gives you a lot more flexibility in dosing, a little bit more difficult to get on, and one of the most expensive basal insulins, by the way. That one goes for like $800. Obviously I don't know what's going on in the black market, but if you didn't have prescription here in the United States, it's a very expensive insulin, but by far one of the best. And that is giving you that flat line, predictability.
Okay, cool. So let's wrap this up for all of our listeners. So if someone is struggling with high fasted blood glucose levels, they're not type 1 diabetic, but they're borderline type 2, what basal insulin would you recommend that they start with? And what dosage would you recommend that they start with? And then also, when should they take it?
Right. So the basal insulin market's tricky. I mean, it's, listen, most people want to get what they want to get. And depending on what your insurance is or what you can get your hands on, what have you, you got to consider basal insulin. Okay. So when you break it down, we have all these little different nuances of each one. Which one's my favorite? I feel like Tresiba to me is just, in terms of risk of hypoglycemia and predictability, the best. I'm giving you a true 24-hour coverage. Toujeo next in line, then Lantus, then Levemir. And then the final one is a generic Basal. But get your hands on basal insulin. Let's try to fix the fasting to ideal. Your blood sugars are struggling. You're not able to get it under 126. We need to do something. You've tried everything and it's still not working. So we want to fix the fasting first. So if you're young and that beta cell hasn't been exposed to all the damage that we speak about, that I see in this industry, then I think, like you said, Trevor, let's act conservative. In the medical profession, we look at somebody that's fasting blood sugars are elevated, and we start with 0.2 units per kilogram body weight. That might be too much. You know, the idea is not to feel this stuff. You know, so if you're on the younger side, like you're in your 30s and you're noticing, and you've ruled out type 1 diabetes, you're not type 1, and your fasting sugars are elevated, and you're, I've done a few things in my life that may have predisposed me to this. You want to maybe start conservative. That's 0.1 units per kilogram. Small amounts, you guys, small amounts.
So one thing I want to just make clear is that she said kilograms, not pounds.
Kilograms. Oh my God.
You take your weight in pounds, divide it by 2.2. And then what I would say is, like, if you're a very young guy, I mean, your beta cell probably isn't totally burnt out. It's probably just tired.
Right.
I would take that number and times it by 0.1 or 0.2. And that would be the amount of units of insulin per day.
So let's just say we had a 190-pound 30-year-old, okay? And giving him the starting dose, I just want you guys to please hear me on this. At 0.1, he's 190 pounds. At 0.1 units per kilogram, that's 8.8 units of insulin. So let's start with 8 units. And I know that sounds so small, but even in package inserts of Lantus, when we first started Lantus, this is going back 20 years ago, we didn't know what we were doing with it. I'm telling you, doctors, they just said on the package insert, just give 10 units. They just said start with 10 and titrate up to get your fasting sugar where you needed it to go. So when I say 8, that's conservative, but it's not far out of the realm of what we did when we didn't really understand weight-based dosing. So start small and then test your fasting sugar, and do not make immediate changes. It takes 3 to 4 days for you to get that stacking of the basal insulin to really see if it's working. So don't say the next day, oh my God, I wasn't right. I'm gonna go up, Take your time and go up by 1 to 2 units. This is not a race, okay? This is not a race to get to a point where you have hypoglycemia. So you start at 8, that's for the 190-pound, 30-year-old, just like you said, just a little tired beta cell. Get the fasting sugar down, and then you just that dose kind of works, you know? And then you're like, okay, I'm gonna go up 2 units. Now I'm 10 because it's not where I need it to be. You shouldn't have to go up that high, you know? You shouldn't, and if you do, then something else might be going on. You don't need a lot. I mean, I know this, for sure. Now, that being said, if you are a guy in your 40s, 45, somebody's coming to my mind right now, 45, been in the, had a couple rough patches, gained a little weight, now he's back on the, this is a guy who's been working out his whole life, issues with his fasting blood sugar. He needs a bit more. So we started at 0.2 units, which is the clinical dosing guidelines for patients that have out of control fasting sugars. And then you move up. All right. And we're moving him up. We moved him up. I mean, he's now taking a bit more. And I'm just going to say this to the public. And I want you to be, please, I don't even like saying this stuff because you really have to be smart about what you're doing. More is never, never, never better with insulin. It's all about your sugar. You're not trying to, I don't know what you're trying to do. You don't want to have a blood sugar that's 55. Normal sugar is 70 to 120, right? You don't want to push it below 70. But the average dose of basal insulin for somebody with diabetes is about 38 units, just to give you guys, for somebody with diabetes. So when you don't have diabetes, I don't expect you to get that high, but you may have diabetes. You know what I mean? I can't tell you how many times I see guys that, are in that position where their beta cell is no longer functioning as well as it should be. And they need to replace what their beta cell is not making at this point.
I think we've pretty much covered everything. The last thing I just want to touch on is that the amount of insulin you're taking if you're a type 2 diabetic or if you're borderline type 2 diabetic is not going to be static. And I've had really good success with people come, they've got high fasting blood glucose levels. We start to make the lifestyle changes we spoke about. I get them on a low dose of basal insulin. And over the course of months, we're able to reduce their basal insulin to actually nothing. And I really think what Colette said is dead on, is that they basically came to me, their pancreas was very, very tired. We're supplying a basal insulin to kind of give the pancreas a break. We're being smarter with their diet, smarter with their lifestyle, things like that. And then basically the pancreas is able to heal itself. And then, basically a year, 2 years down the road, they don't need that insulin anymore.
That's right.
Don't think like, okay, I did everything Trevor and Colette said. My dosage is 15 units per day. I'm going to take this every day for, the rest of my life. No. What I would say is, every month, maybe kind of reassess and try a lower dosage. If you're at 15, maybe after a month, try dropping it down to 12. Maybe try dropping it down to 10. Maybe try dropping it down to 8, 6, and then off. So especially if you're type 2 diabetic, especially if you're a younger guy, you most likely will be able to recover your pancreas. Colette, do you have anything else to add?
I just want to second what you just said, because I have a friend of mine who did just what you just said. We started him on, actually he had his hands on, he got Levemir, and he did it for, and he's like, Colette, you won't believe this. He doesn't, I mean, his fasting sugar, he did it for 3 months, about 3 months, maybe 2 months. And perfect. His fasting sugar is 86, 85, 74. I mean, no insulin, nothing. So it's pretty incredible that this is the push-pull idea. So don't think forever. What we're thinking is, like you said, beta cell preservation. Give it a rest. Let that little guy take a second to regroup and get stronger so that it's able to take the load of the life that we live. And then just be cognizant of the things that we're talking about. I mean, from hydration to sleep to what you're eating. We're eating too many carbs. And I like the idea of, around your workouts. You just do not need to overdose on carbohydrates. It's just not necessary. And what medications and what stimulants and what things you're putting in your body that are causing insulin resistance. And just the idea of more is not better, even in terms of working out. Like, we've become addicted to it, to the point where we are stressing our entire central nervous system over and over again. And we're never giving ourselves a day off. And believe me, my last thing, and I'm going to tell you this, I have to take insulin to work out. Fasting blood sugar, 85 this morning, okay? I take insulin, no food, water, apple cider vinegar, lemon, nothing. And my sugar will go up 100 points if I do not take some rapid acting insulin for the workout, because I was doing back, I was doing deadlift. These exercises cause a fight or flight in your body. So this is happening to me. I know it because I see it, because I don't make insulin. But it's happening to you guys too when you do these crazy, heavy, stressful. I'm not telling you not to do that, but that's just what I'm saying, is you do need to give yourself a day off. You got to rest. Otherwise, you're going to end up in that adrenal fatigue, fight or flight, and that is affecting your beta cell as well.
Colette, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do this video with me. Guys, give Colette a follow on Instagram, follow all her social media outlets. She is a very, very smart woman. Do not take this lightly. Don't just think, oh, I'm a young guy, it's not going to affect my physique or anything like that. High fasting blood glucose levels are linked to inflammation, and inflammation is linked to pretty much every single disease in the body, whether it be cardiovascular disease, cancer, stroke, you name it. So this is something you guys really want to be doing, not just to give you the best physique possible, but also the best health possible. So for Trevor Kouritzin and IFBB Pro Colette Nelson, this has been our Insulin Exposed video series. Thank you so much for watching.